I found the diary in my grandmother's old wooden trunk. It was a plain little journal, black leather bound with a thin strap to hold it shut. It caught my attention because the leather strap was buckled tight, like something that was meant to remain locked away forever. The trunk itself was filled with the usual odds and ends, moth-eaten scarves, letters, postcards from an era long before I was born. But the diary stood out, its corners worn, its edges flaking in dryness. I remember running my fingertips over the cover, almost afraid to open it. Little did I know that the fear was well placed. I had come to my grandmother's empty house to sort through her belongings. She had passed away a month before. My parents were also gone, Dad in a car accident years ago, Mum from an illness shortly after. And so it fell to me, the only living descendant, to decide what to keep, what to donate, and what to throw away. The house had been in our family for generations. It had once belonged to my great-grandmother, and even her grandmother before her, if the old records were to be believed. The place was jammed with everything from antique sewing machines to disintegrating rocking chairs. Opening that trunk was just one task on a very long list, but the diary demanded my attention as soon as I saw it. The words on the first page in a spidery script read, "Property of Beatrice Weatherton, 1912. Beatrice Weatherton was my great-grandmother's maiden name. Immediately, I was intrigued. I shifted boxes aside, found a makeshift place to sit on an old ottoman, and began reading in the dusty glow of a single-floor lamp. The entries were as delicate as the paper itself, each penned in swirling, sometimes frantic lines. They began with ordinary observations, the weather, town gossip, the occasional mention of distant relatives. But soon the tone changed. The once neat cursive turned jagged and uneven as if the writer's hand shook. My great-grandmother's words mentioned shadows in the night. She spoke of hearing quiet tapping on the walls, on the windows. Always late at night, always small as if made by small hands. She tried to ignore it, brush it off as a bird or rodent. But the knocking persisted. As I read, I felt a strange chill in the room. Even though it was midday, the light through the dusty windows seemed to dim. My eyes flicked to the windows of my grandmother's house. Just trees out there, branches swaying in the breeze. Not a soul in sight. I took a breath and turned back to the diary. Beatrice wrote that she would wake sometimes to the faintest scratch, scratch, scratch at her bedroom window, a scraping that turned into an insistent tapping. She'd force her heart to steady, put on her robe, and creep to the glass to see if it was nothing more than an overhanging branch. But the branch was never near enough to cause that sound. Then she thought perhaps it was some neighborhood child playing pranks, but she never saw footprints outside in the soft earth, and each new entry grew increasingly alarmed. Then she wrote about finally catching a glimpse of something. She had gone outside, lantern in hand, to investigate the perimeter of the house after yet another nighttime disturbance. Out by a gnarled oak tree, she noticed a small shape darting through the underbrush. The shape, she claimed, seemed to be the size of a child. When she called out, asking if someone needed help, the shape froze. It turned to face her, but its eyes, they were dark, black pits like two empty holes. Its features were not quite childlike. The limbs looked spindly, the face thin and drawn, the mouth a small, lipless line. Paralyzed with terror, she could only watch as it scuttled back into the shadows, leaving her with that glimpse of two hollow pits where eyes should be. Her next entries spoke of nightmares that plagued her. She dreamt of the childlike figure peering through windows, knocking on doors, whispering to be let inside. She recounted the local folklore, stories passed around by the older folks in town. A creature, or spirit, that roamed the forests and fields on certain nights, hungering for companionship or something more sinister. Some called it the Hollow Boy. Then I came upon the diary's final entry, scrawled hastily, "It keeps knocking on the windows. It wants to be let in. I don't think I can fight the urge much longer. Last night I almost opened the door. It sounded so cold, so alone. But its eyes are nothing. If I do this, if I let it in, I fear I'll never be the same." And that was it. The pages ended there. No farewell, no postscript. Even the date on the final entry looked shaky. My heart hammered in my chest as I read those words. Something about the terror in her handwriting, in her descriptions, felt too real. I was certain this wasn't some creative fiction penned by a bored old woman. She believed every word. The house felt colder, the air heavier. Before I could dwell too long on that feeling, I heard a soft thump from behind. I jumped, startled, only to realize it was the trunk's lid falling shut from the angle at which I'd opened it. I laughed at my own jumpiness and closed the diary. Then I set it gently in my lap. This is ridiculous, I told myself. There's no such thing as the hollow boy. Yet my stomach churned. Something about the tale, about the small knocks on windows, made my skin crawl. I decided I would spend the night in the house. I had so much work to do. The house was in the countryside, with neighbours spaced far apart, fields and woods in between. It didn't bother me. I liked the solitude, at least until reading that journal. But if I was going to preserve anything of sentimental value, like the diary, I needed time to go through everything. I tried to shake off my unease and went to rummage the attic. In the dusty corners I found more journals, though not from my great-grandmother, more like old composition books from my grandmother, sewing patterns, war ration booklets, genealogical charts. The day passed in a blur of sorting and deciding what to keep. By the time the sun was setting, I realized I hadn't eaten anything but a protein bar for lunch. I took a break. The old kitchen was just as I remembered from childhood visits. Worn linoleum floors, an ancient refrigerator that rattled when it kicked on, and a single large window above the sink. Outside that window was a small patch of yard, and beyond that a stand of trees. The wind rustled the leaves, and the silhouettes of the branches grew darker in the twilight. I cooked a can of soup on the old gas stove and ate standing up, lost in my thoughts. Once I finished, I stared out the window. The darkness had deepened considerably. The wind had died down, so the night seemed eerily still. The yard disappeared into blackness near the tree line. I tried not to let my imagination run wild, but I couldn't help thinking of that final diary entry. It keeps knocking on the windows. It wants to be let in. What if something did knock on that window? I forced a small laugh and shook my head. Nonsense, I muttered. Sure, I was on edge because the story was chilling, but I was a grown woman, not a little kid frightened by a boogeyman under the bed. When I put the bowl in the sink, I noticed my reflection in the glass, my pale face and wide eyes. It gave me a start. I looked away. I cleaned up and decided I'd sleep in the guest room upstairs. I flicked off the kitchen lights, grabbed my duffel bag from the living room, and headed for the stairs. The steps creaked ominously, each groan echoing through the empty house. But I refused to be unnerved. I'd spent nights alone in old houses before. It was all about mind over matter. I had no reason to be afraid. Still, my great-grandmother's final words lingered in my mind. If I let it in, I fear I'll never be the same. The guest room was musty, the bed covered with an old dust sheet. I pulled it off, coughing at the sudden cloud of dust, and made the bed with fresh sheets I'd brought. The walls were decorated in outdated floral wallpaper that peeled in places, exposing the plaster beneath. A single wooden chair sat in the corner. The closet door was cracked open, revealing darkness within. Exhausted, I climbed under the covers with the diary resting on the nightstand. My phone charger didn't reach far, so I left the phone to charge near the door. The overhead light flickered once, reminding me of the house's old wiring. I clicked it off. In the darkness, my heart pounded and my ears strained for any sign of unusual noises, but all I heard was the quiet hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the distant hoot of an owl outside. I closed my eyes, determined to sleep. I managed a few hours of restless dreams of frantic scribbles on diary pages, of pale, hollow-eyed children lurking in corners, until something stirred me awake. At first I thought it was the wind, but the night was still. Then I realized it was a faint, distant tapping. Tap, 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 like small knuckles on wood. I tensed up. My breath caught in my throat. I listened, heart hammering. The clock on the nightstand read a little past 3 in the morning. It stopped. I wondered if it was just the house settling or a raccoon. I forced myself to relax. Then it started again. Tap, tap, tap. It was soft, but insistent, and definitely not from inside the house. It was coming from somewhere outside, near the back where the kitchen window was. My stomach twisted into knots. It sounded so small. Could it be a branch? Or was it something else? I thought of the diary, of that creature Beatrice had described. As quietly as I could, I slid out of bed. the floorboards creaking underfoot. My mouth felt dry. I crept to the window in the guest room and peered outside, but from that angle I couldn't see the kitchen or the backyard, only a stretch of empty field that led to the tree line. All was pitch dark. The tapping came again, soft, measured. My body prickled with a dread I hadn't felt in years. I wanted to dismiss it as nothing, but my gut told me otherwise. Should I go downstairs? Should I confront it? The last thing I wanted was to open the back door. Then again, maybe it was just an animal, or a neighbor's kid messing around in the yard. I hesitated. Finally, summoning courage, I snuck into the hallway and descended the stairs, making sure they wouldn't squeak too loudly. The tapping continued, faint but steady. I held my breath as I reached the ground floor. The kitchen was at the end of the narrow hallway, a single door leading in. Weak moonlight shone through the windows, illuminating the edges of the floor. I stepped into the kitchen, bracing myself for what? I didn't even know. My heart pounded in my ears, and then I saw movement at the window, a small silhouette. I nearly gasped. It was a figure, no taller than a young child. It stood on the other side of the glass, but the night was too dark for me to see details. A layer of condensation coated the window, making it hazy. Yet I could sense that the figure was looking inward, at me. It raised one tiny hand and tapped again. Knock, knock, knock. I watched in horror, unable to speak or move. Then a voice, muffled by the glass, high-pitched, almost plaintive. "I'm cold, let me in." Every instinct in my body screamed no. Slowly, I backed away from the window. The figure tilted its head to one side, as if confused, and then pressed a slender, pale palm to the glass. I could see the outline of the hand, fingers thin and elongated. "I'm cold," it repeated, the voice carrying a faint echo. Its words pulled at me, stirring a bizarre pity. Some part of me whispered that it was just a child in need, that I should open the window and bring it inside. But the rest of me knew. I knew that it was wrong, that it was no ordinary child. My great-grandmother's diary glowed in my mind like a warning beacon. Don't let it in. Slowly, the palm slid down the glass, leaving a slight streak in the condensation. I felt the weight of that unseen gaze. Though I couldn't see its eyes through the foggy window, I sensed them, hollow and endless. "I'm cold," it said again, this time with a slight quiver, like it might cry. My hands shook. I took another step back. My back collided with the kitchen counter. For a terrifying moment, I thought I might drop to my knees, either from terror or from an inexplicable urge to open that window. Then, in a moment of clarity, I forced myself to move, to turn and run into the hallway. The last thing I heard was a faint scratching on the glass. Up the stairs I bounded, stumbling in the darkness, nearly tripping on a rug. I slammed the guest room door behind me and locked it, though I wasn't sure why. The thing was outside, but I felt safer somehow with a locked door. I climbed back into bed and pulled the covers around me. Outside, the tapping continued, more distant now that I was upstairs. But I could still hear it faintly, and each knock stabbed at my nerves. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, the tapping ceased. I didn't sleep again until dawn. I woke late the next day, thoroughly exhausted. Sunlight streamed in through the thin curtains. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that the incident had been a dream. But when I tiptoed downstairs to the kitchen, the memory came rushing back. I half expected to see some sign of the visitor, a smear on the window, footprints in the dirt outside. Yet there was nothing but the condensation that had dried in the morning light. I stood there, my heart beating rapidly, as I scrutinized the window. No streak, no prints, no smears. If it wasn't for my great-grandmother's diary, I might have assumed I'd dreamed the entire episode. But the words from that final entry echoed in my mind. This was the exact scenario she had written about, down to the nighttime knocks on windows. My hands trembled. I forced myself to brew coffee and think. I had tasks to complete, but first I needed to calm down. The memory of the childlike silhouette, the voice, "I'm cold, let me in," made me shiver with revulsion. That thing was no child, but what exactly was it? After finishing my coffee, I grabbed Beatrice's diary and flipped through it more thoroughly. I noticed an earlier entry referencing an older cousin or aunt who had also seen something during her childhood. The entry read, "Mary claims she saw a strange child in the orchard. She said its eyes were hollow, but Mother told her it was just a trick of the light. We dare not speak of it again." I scoured the rest of the house for more records. There had to be more about this hollow boy. If my great-grandmother had documented it, perhaps someone else in our family had too. I searched the dusty shelves in the old study. In a cabinet, behind old Bibles and ledger books, I found a binder labeled Family History, 1880-1950. Inside were genealogical charts, some newspaper clippings, and a few typed recollections of local legends. One news clipping from 1893 mentioned a rash of missing children in the neighboring county. No culprit was ever found, but townsfolk spoke in hushed tones of a pale child seen wandering near the edges of farmland. Another clipping from 1915 told of a household that burned down under strange circumstances. Witnesses claimed they heard frantic knocks at the windows just before the fire spread. No official cause was identified. Then, pinned to a page near the back of the binder, I discovered a small photograph, black and white, blurry, with a group of children standing outside a farmhouse. At first glance it looked ordinary, except one of the children stood slightly apart, the face indistinct. My heart hammered. It could have been any child with unfortunate lighting, but there was a blur where the eyes should be, giving it a sinister, eyeless appearance. Someone had scribbled in pencil beneath it, "Avoid the hollow boy." This was enough to convince me that the creature was more than just a rumor. It was an old, dreadful presence in our region. Perhaps it followed certain families or lingered around older homesteads, waiting for someone gullible enough to show pity and open the door. I decided then that I wouldn't remain in the house another night without taking precautions. I had no desire to fight a supernatural entity, but I also needed to finish settling the estate. I resolved to protect myself, or at least try. Surely there must be something I could do, some bit of folklore or old superstition that worked to repel it. I scoured the binder and found an anecdote mentioning salt lines across windowsills and doorways. Another note from a typed letter, undated but likely from the early 1900s, advised, "Never answer the voice, never speak to it, nor open a window or door. Make no bargains. Some have survived by ignoring it until it goes away." I rushed to the kitchen and checked the pantry for salt. There was a box of table salt. I sprinkled a line of it along the windowsill and did the same for the door thresholds. I must have looked ridiculous, muttering to myself about not letting some monster in, but I did it anyway. What harm could it do? What harm? Later in the afternoon, I walked around outside, checking the yard for any sign of footprints or disturbances. Still nothing. The only footprints were my own. The day was bright, the sky a pleasant blue. It felt surreal that anything menacing could dwell here at night. For a moment I considered packing up and leaving. Why should I endanger myself in an old house? But I felt a responsibility to my family legacy. This house was all that remained of my grandmother's life, and all the generations before her. I decided to stay, but I'd be more vigilant. If I heard that tapping again, I would not go downstairs. I would not speak to it. As dusk fell, I prepared for the worst. I ate an early dinner, locked all the doors, and double-checked my salt lines. I even lit a few candles around the living room, as if their glow might ward off something. I laughed bitterly at myself. I didn't normally believe in such superstitions. But after what I had seen, after hearing that soft, pitiful voice, I was ready to try anything. I settled in the living room with the binder, my phone, and some notes I'd taken. It was quiet, no wind, no animal noises. The hush felt oppressive, as though the world was holding its breath. At some point, I dozed off on the couch, exhausted by the previous night's lack of sleep. The flicker of candlelight lulled me. I don't know how long I slept, but I awoke in the dark. The candles sputtered down to stubs. The house was silent, my phone's screen black. I sat up, heart immediately pounding. It was that hour again, the middle of the night when the world was at its quietest. I swallowed hard and strained my ears for any sounds. Nothing. I exhaled, feeling a bit relieved. Maybe it wasn't going to come every night. Maybe it was gone. Then came the knock. Not on a window, but from the front door. A soft, polite rapping, as if a small visitor had arrived. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. My heart was in my throat. The door was only a few steps away from the couch. If I turned my head, I'd see the brass doorknob and the small frosted pane of glass above it, but I was too terrified to look. Knock, knock, knock. I clenched my fists. My mind screamed at me not to answer it, but my body, out of reflex, almost rose. I forced myself to stay put. Then, that voice again, muffled but so close. I'm cold, let me in. I squeezed my eyes shut. Another wave of knocks came, a bit more urgent this time. I remembered the letter's warning. Never speak to it, nor open a window or door. For a moment, the knocking stopped. I felt hope surge in my chest. Maybe it gave up. But then a quieter sound replaced it. A gentle scraping, like fingernails against the wood. My stomach lurched. Please, came the voice again, heartbreakingly sad. Let me in. I realized tears were in my eyes. Something in its tone tugged at me, an almost parental concern. What if it really was a lost child? My rational mind screamed, no, it isn't. But the emotional part of me wavered, remembering times I'd been stuck in the cold as a child, longing for help. The creature knew how to manipulate me, how to mimic that forlorn innocence. I stayed silent, not daring to move. The doorknob rattled gently, but it wouldn't turn. The salt line I'd placed in front of the threshold remained intact. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. I wondered if it could force its way in. The old house didn't have the strongest doors. Finally, after what felt like hours, the scraping eased. The presence shifted. I heard light footfalls on the porch steps. And then silence. I stifled a sob of relief, half believing it was a trick, half believing it might circle around to the back window next. I sat motionless on the couch for the rest of the night, my legs numb from fear, until the first light of dawn crept through the living room windows. Only then did I dare to check the front door. The wooden exterior was scratched in several places, shallow marks that looked like small fingernail gouges. The hair on my arms stood up as I noticed them. I pulled the door open a crack and peered outside. Nothing. The porch was empty, the yard silent except for birdsong. But the marks were there, proof that I hadn't dreamt it. My appetite was gone. My sense of sanity, too. I closed the door and locked it again. Deep inside, I knew this would continue unless I found a way to banish it or escape it. But old diaries and superstitious letters offered only the same refrain. Don't let it in and wait for it to move on. That day I forced myself to keep busy. I sorted more belongings, filled donation boxes, and tried to pack up what I wanted to keep from the house. Yet every so often I'd walk by a window and find myself staring out, half expecting to see a small silhouette. I had to fight not to jump at every little noise, a creaking floor, a settling wall, a car passing far off on the road. At one point I discovered a box of old photographs in the upstairs hall closet, black and white images of family gatherings, holiday dinners, birthdays. My grandmother as a child, standing outside the house with her siblings. The longer I looked, the more I imagined shapes lurking in the background behind the children. I saw what might have been a figure behind a tree, or a blur near a window. I couldn't be sure if my eyes were playing tricks. You're getting paranoid, I told myself. Still, the sense of unseen watchers haunted me. I found myself searching each photo for black, hollow eyes. I saw none, but the fear lingered all the same. In the late afternoon, a storm moved in. Thunder rumbled over the hills and rain poured down in sheets, drenching the yard. I watched from the living room window, the sky a dull, shifting grey. Perhaps the storm would keep the creature away tonight, I hoped, but some superstitious part of me said storms might just fuel such dark presences. As evening approached, I lit the lamps and scattered more salt lines. I placed the diary on a table by my side, as if it were a talisman. Outside, the wind howled, sending branches scraping against the siding. The rain hammered the roof. Every so often, lightning lit the sky, followed by cracks of thunder. At around 11 o'clock, the power flickered. My stomach sank. A power outage in this old house would plunge me into near total darkness, with only a flashlight and a few candles as backup. As if on cue, lightning flashed brightly and thunder boomed a few seconds later. The lights dimmed again, but held. I breathed a sigh of momentary relief. I had set up a small mirror on a nearby table, an heirloom piece from my grandmother. I'm not sure why, maybe to keep an eye on the hallway behind me. When the lightning flashed again, I saw something in that mirror. A pale face in the reflection of the window. I spun around, but nothing was there. My heart pounded so hard I felt dizzy. I had definitely seen something in the mirror, if only for an instant. The rest of the night, I sat in a state of hyper-alertness. Each time thunder rolled, I jumped. Outside, the storm battered the windows. When the knocks finally came, it was nearly 3 a.m. again. Tap, 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 barely audible over the drumming rain. It was coming from the same kitchen window as the first time. Despite my terror, I forced myself to remain in place. I did not want to see that silhouette again. But the tapping persisted, steady and inescapable. I sat frozen on the living room couch, hugging a blanket around me, listening. "I'm cold," I heard faintly. "Let me in." It repeated over and over, never raising its voice, never screaming, just that eerily gentle plea. I turned up the volume on my phone, playing music to drown it out. The knocking blended with the percussion of the storm. Lightning flashed, illuminating the living room. In that split second of brightness, I thought I saw a small hand pressed to the outside of the living room window. My breath caught. I stared. But the next flash came too late, and there was nothing to see but rain streaks. Eventually, the tapping stopped. The voice faded. I sat there, trembling. I couldn't bear to go to the kitchen to check. Instead, I curled up and waited for dawn. Morning came, grey and sullen. The storm had passed, leaving puddles in the yard. I managed to get a few hours of fitful sleep on the couch. Waking, I felt physically and mentally exhausted. The repeated visits had taken a toll on my nerves. My grandmother's once cozy home had become a prison of dread. I decided to phone a local historical society. They had some records on local legends, old folklore, and might help me find more information. But I got a machine, left a message, and received no immediate call back. Perhaps I sounded insane. Perhaps no one had an answer. By midday, a sense of despair weighed on me. Each day, the knocks returned at night, and I was left more rattled than before. Reading and rereading the diary, I found no direct solution, only my great-grandmother's mounting fear. If she had survived, how had she rid herself of the Hollow Boy? Or had she just fled the house? The final entry gave no closure, only warnings. Amid my frustration, I found an envelope tucked behind a loose board in the study. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded many times. It bore no date, but the handwriting matched the diary's. It read, "If you truly cannot endure its presence, if you are too weak to shut your ears to its pleas, then you must not remain. It comes for those who dwell within these walls. Our bloodline has seen it before, and we will see it again. Some say to banish it, one must trick it into crossing running water. Others say only prayer can chase it away. I know not. I only know that you must never open the door. It stands at the threshold of our souls, waiting to be allowed in. Should you give in to pity, should you allow that thing into your home, it will bind itself to you. It will devour you from within until your eyes mirror its emptiness." My entire body went cold. Until your eyes mirror its emptiness. I couldn't shake the mental image of black, hollow pits replacing my own eyes, my very soul consumed by that creature. Was that what had happened to others in the family line who had gone missing or died under strange circumstances? I had no idea if these ancient beliefs about running water or prayer had any truth, but I decided I would not wait to find out. I had obligations, yes, but my safety and my sanity had to come first. The house was already partially sorted. I could hire professionals to handle the rest. If I stayed another night, I might give in. The creature was relentless, and I was exhausted. Some small, traitorous part of me had started to feel sorry for it. I resolved to leave the following morning. I packed my most important belongings, laptops, documents, personal items. Everything else I'd leave for a professional estate service. That evening I took a long look through each room, saying a silent goodbye to the house of my childhood memories. Even though fear had tainted my final days here, I couldn't help the pang of sorrow at leaving the old place behind. As the sun set, I gathered my things by the front door, prepared to depart at first light. I decided to spend my last night in the living room, with as many lights on as possible. I tried to read, to watch something on my phone, anything to distract myself. Outside, the night was cold but clear, the moon a thin crescent. The hush descended again. Shortly after midnight, the knocking started. I stiffened. It came from the back window again, the same consistent tap, tap, tap. My breath caught, but I forced myself to ignore it. I turned up the volume on my phone, tried to focus on a streaming video. The knocks grew louder, or perhaps more frantic. Then they stopped, moved along the side of the house. Tap, tap, tap. Another window. Then the living room window. My pulse pounded. The curtains were drawn, but I could see the shape of the figure through the thin fabric. A small silhouette, backlit by moonlight. My phone shook in my trembling hands. The silhouette pressed close, its presence disquieting. Slowly, it raised a hand and scratched at the glass. I tried to block it out, but the next whisper came, so close and clear it felt like it was in the same room. "I'm cold, let me in." I shut my eyes. It repeated its plea, voice cracking with a childlike shiver. I bit my lip, refusing to speak. Then it said something different. "I'm so lonely." My heart twisted. Guilt flared, followed by panic. It was so hard to ignore such a voice, especially when it sounded so helpless. But that was exactly how it lured you, with innocence, with sorrow. It took every ounce of willpower not to stand up and open the window to comfort whatever was out there. The silhouette lingered for a long time, occasionally knocking or scratching. Finally, it drifted away. I didn't dare look out. I didn't dare move. Silence returned. I remained on the couch, tears in my eyes, struggling to maintain my resolve. Just a few more hours until dawn, I told myself. You can do this. When the first pale light of dawn brightened the horizon, I got up, stiff and sore from a night of fear. I grabbed my belongings, my suitcase, my grandmother's diary, and the family binder. The rest would remain. I needed to be gone before night fell again. Before leaving, I stood in the foyer and gazed around, a swirl of emotions in my chest. Sorrow, regret, fear. Would I ever return? Could I ever face this house again without remembering that creature knocking on the windows, whispering in that plaintive voice? I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The cool morning air hit my face. I carefully locked the front door with a heavy click. As I turned to descend the porch steps, I saw small footprints in the dirt near the window child-sized, leading away from the house and disappearing into the grass. My stomach lurched. It was real. It was real. I hurried to my car, threw my bags in the back seat, and climbed behind the wheel. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, and my eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. For an irrational moment, I expected to see a small, hollow-eyed face staring back from the back seat. But there was nothing. The car roared to life. I sped away, the old tires kicking up gravel on the long driveway. As I left the property, I glanced at the house in the mirror. The windows stared back like vacant eyes. I prayed that creature wouldn't follow me, that it was bound to the place, or at least to that land. The diary's last page haunted me. It wants to be let in. I had never given in, so maybe it would remain trapped outside, waiting for a victim that never came. I rented a small apartment in the city, far from the rural area where the house stood. For weeks, I jumped at every small sound in the night, every creak in the hallway. Sometimes I dreamt of knocks on my bedroom window, or a high-pitched voice whispering my name. But each morning, I woke to an undisturbed world. No footprints, no scratches on my door. Bit by bit, I convinced myself that I was safe. Months passed. I immersed myself in work, trying to put the entire ordeal out of my mind. But I never forgot those black, hollow pits for eyes, or how close I'd come to unlocking the door out of pity. I still had my great-grandmother's diary. It sat in a drawer, a secret testament to the horrors that roamed the night in lonely places. Sometimes, late at night, I read its pages again, searching for any new clue I might have missed, but I always ended up closing the diary with the same chill in my spine. There was no easy solution, no exorcism or ritual that guaranteed safety. Only a warning. Don't let it in. I considered the possibility that it could find another old house, another unwary occupant. The thought made me shudder. Perhaps it has roamed for decades, centuries even, waiting patiently in the darkness. Maybe it is part of some ancient evil, or a restless spirit longing for what it can never have, an invitation inside. I tried to push those worries aside. I was free of it, I told myself. The house would likely be sold or demolished in time, and the creature might be forced to move on. Or maybe it would vanish if no one was there to feed its power. But deep down I wondered, if my great-grandmother's diary had survived, how many others wrote of the same horrors? Last week, a letter arrived at my apartment. It was from a realtor handling the estate. They needed me to sign papers about the property which had finally sold. I felt a wave of relief, good riddance, and yet an uncomfortable pang of guilt. Some family, some unsuspecting buyer, was about to move into that old place. Would the hollow boy remain dormant, or would it resume its dreadful knocks at the windows? My pen hovered over the documents. My rational side said, "There's no legal precedence to warn them. You'd sound insane." My conscience said, "They should know." In the end, I signed the papers without writing any warnings. What was I supposed to say? Your new house might be haunted by a hollow-eyed creature that knocks at windows and begs to be let in. I sent the papers back. 2 days later, I dreamed of the house again. In my dream, I stood inside it, the walls stripped bare. Rain lashed the windows. I saw the silhouette of a small child outside, pressing its hands to the glass, whispering in a voice that shook with sorrow. "I'm cold. Let me in." I turned away. My reflection stared back at me in a large mirror. My eyes were black holes, hollow and endless. I woke up screaming. Now, each night, I make sure my windows are locked, my curtains drawn. I sleep with a lamp on, no matter how silly that makes me feel. Sometimes, when I wake in the small hours, I swear I hear the faintest tap, tap, tap on the glass. I hold my breath, waiting to see if the sound returns. Usually it doesn't. Usually it's just my nerves. But sometimes I can't help but think of the new owners of that old house. I imagine them unsuspecting, going about their lives. And maybe one cold night they'll hear a knock at the window or a scratching at the door. They might see a pale figure standing outside, the size of a child. They might feel a terrible sorrow in their hearts, a tug of empathy urging them to open that door, to let the poor, cold child inside. If they do, if they yield to that voice, they'll finally see the truth, the black hollows where eyes should be, the emptiness that hungers. And then it might be too late for them. I keep telling myself I'm free of the hollow boy, that I broke the cycle by fleeing before it was too late. But a whisper of doubt remains. Sometimes on windy nights, I still hear the faint echo of a child's voice carried on the breeze. Perhaps it's only my imagination. Perhaps not, because once you've heard the hollow boy's plea, once you've felt that pang of empathy for something so awful, a tiny piece of you is never the same again. And sometimes, just sometimes, that piece will wonder, what if we let him in?